Hey guys, Kevin here to bring you a brand new video where today I wanted to discuss a TV show as well as a film that I just watched today. But the TV show I watched a while ago, but yeah, I watched the film today, and that is Twin Peaks. And the film is called Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I saw this show a long time ago. I want to say 4 years ago. Yeah, quite some time ago, and I really liked it. At least in the first season, I really liked it a lot. I liked the second season somewhat too. Like it still had some like enjoyable aspects. With essentially they're trying to investigate the mystery of Laura Palmer's death, and they're going down this rabbit hole of finding different clues, piecing everything together, figuring things out, like what characters played a role in this, what really happened, what really went on. It's all just like so immersive and so engaging. I feel like it does get a little like convoluted and not as good later on, like in the second season, especially since you already know who the killer is by the end of the first season. And so it kind of just like it veers off into like a little bit of a weird direction. Some people have like openly expressed like hatred for the second season. Like I'm not that bad about it, but I think it's definitely like reduced in quality as far as it goes. But what I really want to talk about though is like that first episode of Twin Peaks, because that is like definitely the best part of the show in my opinion, because with the start of Twin Peaks, we essentially like get this tragedy of Laura Palmer's death thrown like right at us, and we see how it really like affects like this small town, and we're so like encapsulated by this like environment and engaged in like what's happening, and how this is like so sad for like everyone who knew Laura Palmer, and just everyone in general like being affected by it. And it's really like such a great depiction of like tragedy, like striking something like this. And then along with that, you have this whole like mystery of Laura Palmer's death. She seems so innocent and beautiful. How could such a thing happen to her? But it's like that thing where it's like things aren't always what they seem. Underneath the surface there was something dark and bad going on with Laura Palmer. She was getting herself into like all these bad things, and like all these things were happening, even though it seemed like not a lot was happening. And you have Kyle MacLachlan, who's like the special agent. He's like investigating this, and he's like finding all these clues, and you're kind of like piecing together like what's really going on here. And with that, you get like this like immersive atmosphere too. That's really good with this whole town of Twin Peaks. That I just absolutely loved. I think it's weird to say like it is like a film, because like the pilot is an hour and a half long. So I guess you can call it a film. Um, I feel like it's a film. So like I would say this is my second favorite David Lynch film. Second to Lost Highway being my favorite David Lynch film. I really love that pilot episode of Twin Peaks. If you want to call it a film or not, whatever. But let's get into Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. This is kind of an interesting like angle to tell the story. Because it's a little bit like reductive to say, especially for a David Lynch film, to call this a prequel. But in a way, it kind of is a prequel. I mean, it's a different way of seeing, what exactly happened to Laura Palmer. To see, you know, how did she die? What happened? What happened from her perspective? Like, how did the events really go down? And you kind of also just get like more perspective and more detail as far as like, this whole like setting, and you get more like a better understanding of like how this all works and like what was going on. So like with this, I think it really added something to it that was like really good. I will say, obviously we know that Laura Palmer dies. Like if you've seen the Twin Peaks show, like she dies. So like it's already like kind of limiting off the bat just because you know what the outcome is gonna be, and that is the ultimate like outcome in the end. Um, but for what it's worth, it's still like pretty enjoyable. And there are, with Lynch, he likes to show you all these like crazy things that don't make any sense. So there are like certain like elements of this that just like you're like, what? Well, why is that there? But like that's fine. It's just like, I feel like I got a really good understanding of what this film was getting at for like a majority of it, and I'm satisfied with what I saw. I enjoyed it. So with this whole story of Laura Palmer's death, and what went down, I think it had a really interesting angle that it took, because I feel like the big angle that it takes is like how we as people can often like keep things in and not talk to each other and not be there for one another, and it can really be like our downfall. It can really like hurt us so much, and in a very extreme sense, it really hurt Laura Palmer. She like was so like closed off, and she wasn't like leaning on anybody. She was just kind of like dealing with her own problems, and not living life with a purpose, and just kind of like veering off into her own like place, you know ultimately to meet like an untimely fate. And it is like also just like tragic in that way too, along with the way the show told the tragedy of her death. It's just tragic to see you know such like a person, such like a beautiful innocent person, just like spiral out of control, down this like dark path. And she like did like cocaine, and yeah, and she is just like not on a good trajectory, and you could just tell that things were going wrong with her. And you know it's interesting to think about, because like this film, um you know if you look at it like from the outside, that you're like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, who's Bob? Like, why is Bob like this? Like, what is Bob, but really in the end, like, I can just like look at it and be like, this is just a representation of evil, just encroaching upon someone's life and just creeping in, and ultimately finding its way in to ultimately, give this character an untimely fate. So with this show, I feel like ultimately the biggest thing that it's getting at is the effect that parents can have on us, and how much of a role they play in our lives, and how they can be both the best and the worst thing that's happened to us. Because with Laura Palmer, the whole thing about it is that she's like closed off. She doesn't want to tell her parents, what's going on with her life. Like at one point, they ask her, and specifically her father asks her, how's everything going? How's school? And she's just like, oh, it's fine. But even though like it's not fine at all, she has like so much shit going on in her life, and she's actually like so like depressed and upset and sad and whatnot. And then like right after that, her father proceeds to just be a total asshole to her, and like gives her a hard time for not washing her hands before dinner. And this is just like a representation of like, parents are someone who are there for us, and we should rely on them and confide in them, and talk to them if something's wrong. And we have a tendency as people to bottle things up, but we need to like be open about sharing, if something's wrong, if we need help. We can't be afraid to be there for one another in that way. And that really goes with like Laura Palmer's whole thing, is like she like just didn't want to confide in anybody, and that was her biggest weakness. And you know and then it ties into how her parents were well, specifically her father, Leland, was so mean to her. And, the big thing about this that's being represented here is that evil is ultimately shown in within Laura Palmer's parents, because in the end, Bob, you know, Bob is not really like a real person, but he's like a representation of evil, and he ultimately overtakes Leland to kill Laura Palmer. Like, Leland actually is the one who kills Laura Palmer, technically. But in the end, it's basically saying how, like, Laura Palmer's parents were her greatest like downfall, and ultimately like what like made her meet her fate in the end. And so we see this whole theme of, just being open to one another, and the need to like talk to one another, and just not be afraid to share our feelings. So I think that's a great depiction of that. Really effective. I will say, like, it's also interesting with, like, James Hurley too, because, like, he seemed like a really good stand-up guy, and like nice and all, but he was like too good for Laura Palmer. That's the thing, because like Laura Palmer, you know, wasn't seeking someone just like safe and cool and nice like this. Like, he seemed like such a good guy, but she didn't want that. And he was right there for her, and he wanted to be with her, and he loved her, and she even said she loved him at one point. But at the same time, it was just like, this it goes with this whole thing of like Laura Palmer being, you know, someone who, couldn't connect with anybody, and just, was spiraling off on her own. One thing that did bug me was that, I think everything is accurate with this story, but one thing that did bug me was that uh, the actress who played Donna is not the same actress in the movie. Donna is Laura Palmer's best friend, so to me, it's kind of ridiculous that, like, they would just like scrap the actress, and think you wouldn't notice. And I was like, I don't think that's the same person, but yeah, I mean, like, Donna Hayward, kind of a major character, so it's a little bit like, okay, I mean, not the greatest thing to have happen, but alright. There must have been like some issue with not being able to get the old actress back. Um, but other than that, it's pretty spot on, and if anything, just adds greater detail to the already established story of Twin Peaks. So yeah, I think it's really good overall. It's not quite as good as the pilot, but it's pretty good. I do still have to watch the return of Twin Peaks, so I'll have to update once I watch that. But I have no idea what this has in store, so I'll have to see what that brings. So yeah, but yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave a like if you have, and I'll see you guys in the next one.